The last episode we want to discuss in relation to communion is the experience of two of the disciples on the day of resurrection. It is written that that same day they were going to a village called Emmaus. That was their place of abode, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking to each other about everything that had happened. And as they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came up and walked alongside with them, but they didn't recognize him. And he asked them, "What is it you are discussing together as you walk?" And they stood still, they were downcast, and one of them, called Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one in Jerusalem that is not aware of what's going on these days?" And he said, "What?" And they said, "It's about Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and before men. But the chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and people crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one that was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, is the third day since that time, since all these things took place. And in addition, some of our women amazed us, and they started describing to him what they had heard from the women that went to the tomb, and said that they had a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then they narrated the story of Peter and John that went to the tomb and found it just like the women said, but that they didn't see Jesus. And Jesus started blaming them, saying, "How foolish you are, how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And he started the whole walk to Emmaus. He started teaching them about the Torah and how the Torah and the prophets announced his coming, his suffering, everything about him. And then they approached the village, and it was nightfall, and they told him, "Well, you're not going to continue. Just stay with us for tonight." And it is written that while he was at table with them, sharing a meal, he took the bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to share it with them. And then their eyes were open and they recognized Jesus, but at that point, it left. And what we learned from that is that, first of all, Jesus comes to us as we are. You can be depressed, you can be downcast, you can be just having the worst time ever. But Jesus is still there, just like he was in the storm with the disciples as they nearly drowned. And he was just blaming them at that time for their lack of faith. So he is taking us as we are. And then the first thing he does, and that is a preparation to the sharing of communion, just like we see in John chapter 6, how Jesus talked at length about his being the bread of life, that unless we eat his body, his flesh, and drink his blood, we wouldn't be able to partake with him. And what he's continually saying, that unless you eat my blood, you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you won't have any part with me. And he will continue saying that. And we remember now that his body is the church. And so he's coming aside us, he's teaching us his word, he's revealing himself through his word, and then the communion is the climax of this meeting, of this intimacy with Jesus and with God. As we approach his word first, then we are able to commune with God. And that is why communion is preceded by Bible study and discipleship. As we become disciples, then we can then share in the body and blood of Jesus, remembering his death until he comes. And that is very, very important. And we see again and again the two components of communion: revelation of God through his word and through that meal. The two components of the same reality: God with us, Emmanuel.